Morning all. I wanted to talk about something very unserious. Um, it's only as serious as maybe Celebrity Love Island or the sex lives of the Kardashians. Or at least that's how serious it's considered. And as with many of my ramblings, this is of really only of interest to my own countrymen, although others may find it interesting in some ways. And that thing I wanted to talk about was British manufacturing. You see, not considered to be very important at all, is it? Um, and it occurred to me, um, my daughter came home the other day and she was telling me they were shopping for a new car. And she was telling me about these cars. I think it's pronounced JQ, Chinese make, obviously. Um, but it's like a Land Rover Defender type car. I think it's as big as that and as impressive as that. But instead of it being £100,000, it's £36,000. Now, I can't blame them. The damage has already been done. I can't blame her and her boyfriend. Um, there aren't any British cars available. Except Defenders, which are £100,000. Not that they're particularly British anyway, uh, being part of Jaguar Land Rover, which is owned by the Indian firm Tata. Um, and the reason that I say this is not serious is because nobody cares about this stuff. And another, it is related about to this is that, and it's not important in the great scheme of things because it's just, uh, it's just a pissing contest really. Um, 100 years ago, this country was the most powerful country on the planet. 50 years ago, having ceded that position to the United States after the Second World War, this country was still an industrial titan and was second only to the United States in many, many ways, which of course was no shame considering the size of the United States. But 50 years ago, our industrial, uh, the amount of manufacturing as a percentage of the UK economy was between 25 and 30%. Now it's 9%. And getting smaller all the time. Now, when I say this is not a serious point of discussion, compared to all the other things that are happening at the moment, it really isn't all that serious. Compared to the grooming gangs, compared to population replacement, compared to the loss of freedom of speech, compared to the trans madness, compared to the Ukraine war and the military industrial complex, it's not considered all that important at all. And the more it is considered not important, the more it's allowed to slide. And this is only important to me personally, it seems. It seems that nobody else, or very few other people, really care about this stuff. And we have 3 cars in the family. I have my Jag, um, which was built at a time when Jaguar was under the ownership of Ford, so that's not completely British either. Um, and I have my work car, which is a Japanese car. And the reason I've got that is I needed a car. The car I had before blew its gearbox to pieces, and I needed a car. My friend had this car sitting in his front drive, and he wanted to get rid of it. I needed the car, so I bought it. And there's nothing wrong with this car. It's perfectly fine, and it's got some nice touches in that Japanese way, and it's very useful. But I wish that it was British. I wish I did have another British car. You know, my wife's car is a Vauxhall, which is a German car with a British name, because it's essentially an Opel. It's also a nice car, and I'm not knocking it as it is. But I do feel ashamed by these things. And I wonder if I'm the only person who thinks that. I actually feel personally shamed by the fact that we all have to buy foreign stuff now. And of course, it is a lot more important than most people imagine, because it has led to our impoverishment, relatively speaking, compared to, for instance, Germans, or even the French, or even the Italians, um, who've maintained much larger industrial bases in this country. And our reliance on financial services is it's not appropriate for a country of this size. Yeah, it's okay if you're Singapore or Hong Kong, but we've got 70 million people to support. Like I say, compared to population replacement and the grooming games, it's not important at all. But it was one of the bedrocks of this country, its ability to make things. And now that's all gone. Like I say, am I the only person who thinks this way? I mean, if I have any German listeners, I mean, what do you think? Um, when you're in Germany, there's German cars everywhere, and you come to England, and there's German cars everywhere. If I was a German, I'd think that would make me feel very proud. And I've been having my continued conversations with Grok, which is probably, I'm beginning to realise that it's not actually as fruitful as I thought it was, um, because it appears that all Grok does is collate a load of mainstream opinion, and that's how it comes to its conclusions. But if you challenge it, it tends to agree with you, you know, which is, it's kind of helpful in a way, and it helps to sharpen your own arguments in a way. But um, whenever I, ask it questions on this subject, it acknowledges the industrial decline, the deindustrialization, and but then it also says, well, Britain has strengths, and the strengths are green tech, which is basically nearly all supplied by foreign technology, so it's not British at all, um, and things like, as I mentioned before, financial services. Um, so when pressed, it basically agrees with me that there is nothing to the British economy. It's all about banks and insurance companies. Oh, and the BBC. So, that's a strength. And it also uses the United States as a comparison. The United States is deindustrialized to a comparable degree, not quite to the same degree. But the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and the petrodollar and the world's reserve currency. It can do all sorts of things that we can't. And with Trump now in the White House, it does seem as if American manufacturing might be undergoing a renaissance. Yeah, and I hope so. And I feel happy for Americans for that reason. And I feel jealous. See, people often you tend to think of culture as being literature and old buildings, and in the British sense, pop music, the Beatles. Um, and that is culture, of course it is. But culture is also the stuff that we make. It deepens culture in a solid and unshowy way. Although those 100 grand AMG Mercs that parked outside every Turkish barber in the country is not particularly unshowy. That's pretty showy, really. But and for the benefit of my foreign viewers, if there still are any, um, I appreciate this is not something that is very important to you. In the same way that the vanishing of the principle of free speech in this country is important only to Americans as a warning to them. But it is extremely important to me, the free speech thing in particular. Americans like to characterize us as as if we don't know what free speech is. But of course we know what free speech is. It's been a bedrock of our society for hundreds of years. It's been a bedrock of our society since before America was invented. And Americans should not make the mistake of believing that Keir Starmer and the Labour government are the entirety of what it means to be British. They are not. They got in by default because everyone was so incensed by the betrayal of the Conservative Party. The political establishment is not the country, in the same way that Joe Biden's Democrats weren't America. See, the grooming gang shame is the kind of pinnacle of our shame. It's the thing that is the most shameful of all. And despite that shame, um, I'm glad that it is world news. And people like Elon Musk have picked it up. It's just a shame that it's too deep to cover up. But I'm wondering if shame is something that we've been conditioned to live with, and the lesser shame of other things, like that you can't buy a British car anymore, is has been a kind of condition for that. 50 years ago, people would raise an eyebrow at you buying a foreign car. You know, in that British way, it was no more than that. You know, you know, it's not like people's Teslas getting vandalised now. It wasn't like that, but it was an eyebrow was raised, and 10 years before that, it would have been considered, well, even so 50 years ago is 1975. So even then, people would make grumblings about treasonous behaviour, but somehow it didn't stick, and it became acceptable. I mean, part of the reason, let's be frank about that, part of the reason it became acceptable was because um, Japanese cars didn't break down, and British cars broke down all the time. So it's not surprising. Um, I mean, I for many years had a prejudice against Japanese cars because at the time, in the late 70s, early 80s, the Japanese car industry had decimated the British car industry with some of the most boring cars imaginable. And they were boring and tinny and ugly and not very nice at all, but they didn't break down. And I've had a change of heart in the last few years, actually last decade or so, because of all the foreign companies that now dominate the British manufacturing landscape, the Japanese have actually been pretty good for us. My last car before this one was my Nissan Micra, which it was built in Sunderland, but it was also designed there. So it was a Japanese company, you know, but it was as British as anything else. It just didn't have a British name badge on it. It's certainly more British than my wife's Vauxhall. So I think all this general degrading of our society includes the economy and industrial capacity. Um, and now we're getting to the stage where, now we're getting to the stage where, um, despite being rich in raw materials, oil and coal, natural gas, we're buying all our stuff from abroad. They just closed Grangemouth oil refinery in Scotland. You know, supposedly in our drive for net zero. That's another thing that, the Grok always goes on about. That we are world leaders in pursuing net zero. Well, being a world leader suggests that others will follow. The Chinese and the Indians are not following us, and they would be mad to. I know there are more things. There are things that are far more important than that. But this is part of the sort of degradation of our pride. We didn't just wake up one morning and forget how to make things. Is it really possible that our governments have been intent on destroying the UK since the Second World War? My feeling is if somebody had set out that as a policy goal, they couldn't have done it any quicker. But this is why I'm often sceptical of people's pronouncements of patriotism. It's quite easy to drape yourself in the Chinese made Union Jack. It's quite easy to do that. It's a lot more difficult to commit to buying a to buying a British car. That was a Freudian slip, wasn't it? And people will say, "Well, the British cars were shit." Well, were they shit? They were certainly lacking in lots of ways. Um, with a load of communists in the trade unions, that never helped. But I think so much of this plays into you just erode, chip away at people's pride. First, in things that don't really matter. You buy a new toaster. Oh, it's made in Japan, or it's made in Thailand or South Korea, or wherever it is. And then it's your fridge, and then it's your television, and then it's your car, and then it's your people. And I think what we've got is a I think what we have is a pride deficit. It's a bit like taking freedoms away. You do it little by little, tiny little steps at a time, so that nobody really notices. Before you know it, your daughters are getting gang raped. So I think what we have is a pride deficit. If we had more pride, none of this would happen. I mean, we beat the Nazis, for heaven's sake. You know, the the ruthless and super professional, fanatical Nazis with all their technical know-how and all their determination. No, I don't know. It's somehow we have to reignite the sense of national pride. Somehow we've got to do it. And we don't have much to work with these days. This country's culture exists only in memory. Quite how you drag that up from the mists of time. It's like trying to invoke King Arthur. But I think that is what needs to happen. Certainly Nigel Farage and Reform are not going to fucking do it, that's for sure. So, I don't know. Answers on a postcard, I suppose. So, despite all this gloom, what we do have to do, even if we do nothing else, is that we have to stay free.